Well, this is one of the things that I think you will see coming about with the reauthorization of the SEA. Because if you look across our nation and you look at schools that aren't making it in terms of AYP, adequate yearly progress, about 90% and better of those schools aren't making it because of one of two subgroups. It's special ed or English language learners, right? And it's because we have some kids who are so far behind. I mean, they're just not going to make it. They might make excellent progress. And so one of the things that's being considered in the reauthorization is to say, let's consider progress instead of a single cutoff for all students. And when a kid is making significant progress over the course of the school year, the educators are really doing a pretty good job. And so if over the course of the school year, a kid can make a year's progress based upon where they started, if they started 3 years behind, but they made a year's progress during that time, given that all the previous years they're only making half a year's progress, that's significant. And we're going to give educators credit for that. So I think you're going to see when the reauthorization comes out and we look at things like AYP, that for those subgroups, they're going to be looking at progress as well as just a product indicator.
The issue of late work comes up quite a bit. And we have to understand something. There is a difference between what we demand of people who have already been proven themselves as competent, proficient, mastery level. We hold them accountable for a certain level of meeting deadlines because they've learned the stuff, whatever the skill was, whatever the content was. But there's a different frame of reference, a different mindset when you're first teaching somebody something they need to learn, to become proficient. So, am I going to hold somebody who's not very proficient, who's struggling, who's coming to know, to the same level of accountability in terms of late arrival of work that I would somebody who's very, very proficient already? I wouldn't. In fact, one of the things we've realized is that kids in school, kindergarten through like 10th grade, and sometimes even older than that, they have very little portion of their day that's actually their own discretionary choice. The coach says the sports practice will be 3 o'clock to 5:30. The child goes home, mom and dad say, you need to watch your younger siblings while we go work or whatever it might be. During the school day, math is 10:45 to 11:45. You have lunch from 12 to 12:25. It's very much this cattle call. And we don't want to hide behind that factor model, that conveyor belt. We also want to realize kids don't have a lot of control over their time. So if we're going to demand of them adult level competencies when it comes to meeting deadlines, then we better give them the keys to the car, the money to drive it, the insurance when they're 9 years old, when they're 13 years old, because they can't act on it. So to hold people accountable for adult level competency when they don't have the tools or the maturity to be able to act upon that is a little abusive in my thinking. Then the other thing to think about is this. If I were to hand out ukuleles to everybody in the faculty, and I said, I want you all to play this beautiful adagio within 1 hour, some people would fly with that. Other people would need a lot more time. As people are coming to know, I'm not going to demand of them this automatic, you learn at the same pace as everyone else. That's the factory model of schooling that we realize doesn't work. In fact, to really explore differentiated instruction, it's almost countercultural. It's almost subversive because schools weren't meant to meet the needs of kids who don't get it first or right away. The whole system kind of conspires against that. So we're going to have to do things a little differently from time to time because people learn in different ways and in different timelines. That's fine. We can do that. But one of the things that's operating kind of against teachers is this idea that we have to get through the curriculum by the end of the year. Well, it turns out if you do the math, kindergarten through 12th grade, it takes to about grade 22 to really teach everything and do justice to all of it. We tend to stop at schools, most schools, at grade 12. We're 10 years shy. So a lot of teachers go through their year like this. Here's a bunch of stuff, take a test. Here's a bunch of stuff, take a test. Here's a bunch of stuff, take a test. You didn't get it when I taught it? Well, that just stinks for you. Join us when you can. And we keep moving through the year. This is no way to teach humans. But it is something we have as a system. And until somebody brighter than us comes up with a better idea, we're going to have to do some things to mitigate those negative aspects. So when we look at late work, 51% of the time, in other words, majority of the time, we can do the right thing. And that's okay. We all tolerate a little bit of hypocrisy in ourselves. If we're going to do it right, I'd give you lots of time. In fact, the idea of summative assessment, a final deadline, this is the declaration of all you know, is not necessary in good pedagogy. It's only necessary for sorting humans into different areas, different classes, and for clerical sanity. That's really about it. But when it comes to learning, well, I think about the first books I ever wrote, and I think, oh, I could say that so much better. Artists, I know, my cousin is an artist. He wants to touch up paintings he did 15 years ago. Everybody thinks they could go back and be better at something they did prior to this time, and that's okay. That's a part of learning, but we're stuck in this system. So now we've got late work. The suggestion, be constructive to recover from being irresponsible, from not knowing, maybe from being just kind of reckless in your time management. Actually teaches more than slapping a label on it. You are late, it's a 0. That'll learn you. It doesn't teach. You don't want to become a rim waver that waves on the rim of the pit the child has dug for himself. You want to jump in and walk side by side with that child. That will teach more. So let's say a child is late with something and other kids are on time. We're fine with that. Then that child needs more time to go back and do it. He was irresponsible, whatever it was. For him to walk through that recovery, redoing the work, or doing it for the very first time if he didn't do it right away, while also maintaining the rest of his life, he will so learn to respect deadlines. He will come, it's just easier if I keep up. And that's exactly what mature scholars do. So if you could set it up where the kid could recover from having missed a deadline in full, he will actually learn more than if you just say it's a 0. That'll learn you. I mean, think about it. There are a lot of teachers who tend to be fairly rigid, and they say, well, I'm preparing him for the larger world. You see, in the larger world, you're allowed to be late more often than not. Dental appointments start late, quite often. With my own 2 kids, I've had a lot of experience with that. Flights take off late, quite often. Surgeries run late. People are allowed to be late with their taxes. If they are, they pay a little tiny penalty if they don't file an extension. But even if they don't file for the extension and don't get that, the penalty is so small. It's not give us your wife, your car, your life. You are dead to us, because they want to keep you solvent, keeping money going into the government systems. So many times we're allowed to be late. You close on a house and the broker calls you 4 hours later and says, you didn't sign this one place in the contract. Can you drive back over here and re-sign? Yes, we can do that. We're in the world to look out for each other, not to play gotcha. We're not really preparing kids for that world beyond school by using adult level deadlines. For example, an adult, they work for a software company and the software is due by December 15th or the company will lose $12 million. There's no delay of deadline there. But this adult knows himself, knows his team, was given 6 months to prepare this, so he makes November 15th his drop dead date. And he delivers it to the customer. The customer gets to do a little quality control, play with it a little bit. Maybe they change their mind in some of the aspects of it. They send it back, they debug back and forth. So on December 15th, it is there ready to go, just as promised. But that's an adult level maturity. And that only comes from making mistakes along the way, not meeting a deadline, learning how to meet deadlines, doing task analysis. To demand that of these children who are coming to know that, just saying, I'm going to set the deadline, and if you don't make it, I'll give you an F, and that'll teach you to make deadlines, is a false assumption that there's some kind of moral fiber built. It doesn't work that way. There's so many other constructive ways we can handle late work. People often ask, how much should homework count in the overall grade book? And you have to decide, what is the role of homework? Well, for me, homework is practice, an extension of that which is already learned. For example, I would never give a kid a homework assignment, and we call it practice in my classroom, so we're mindful of the role it plays. Your science practice tonight, your math practice tonight, instead of homework, because homework has that emotional baggage. It's a compliance and power play between child and parent or child and teacher. So we call it practice. Well, I would never dream of giving a child practice of something that it didn't have in some way vetted in the classroom that he understood it. Homework is to practice those things already learned, or at least already well understood. So in a classroom, I actually might give kids different homework assignments based on their readiness level. I'm not going to do one wonderful lesson that's differentiated and really sound instruction and then undermine the whole thing with one-size-fits-all practice. If you ever coached a sport, you know that kids, some are doing batting practice, some fielding, some catching, some need to lift some weights, some practice their running and their speed, but not everybody's doing catching practice. Not everybody is doing batting practice. You give different practice, different levels of readiness. Okay. So now, if we're mindful that it's about instruction, it's formative in nature, is as you're coming to know, it needs to be a safe place where you can wrestle with things. Unfortunately, I've seen this down as young as first grade, but certainly all the way through elementary and middle school and high school, it's more comfortable for students today to say, I forgot my homework, or I didn't have time to do my homework. To come across as a little scatterbrained or irresponsible than to say, I didn't understand what I was doing and couldn't do it. Because we tend to just, oh no, it's a sign of weakness if you have academic struggle in any degree. So we've got to work on that side of it. I get that. But it does remind us of this role of homework. Given its role, then you decide how much it should count. Well, homework is formative in nature. It's as you're coming to know. But grades only report what you know against standards or outcomes or objectives at the end of the learning. So homework doesn't have a place in that report. Think about this. What if a kid does no homework ever, but he demonstrates all the evidence, he aces every single test, he gets 100 on everything, but he does no homework, no practice? Should he get any grade less than an A? Most teachers would say no. But a lot of times the reality is the student gets not just a B, a C, or a D, but often gets an F. When those teachers are interviewed, why did you do this? They often say, well, I wanted to teach him responsibility. I wanted to teach him a lesson. You can't get away with that in the real world. Well, actually, you can. This is a little bit radical, but hear me out before you judge it. Homework is 100% irrelevant as to the report of what students know against standards or can do against standards. It's very relevant to them coming to know it. I think practice does improve your performance with things. The problem is, what does a grade represent? It's only a report of what you know at the end. So any teacher method, any teacher technique that is used to get students to a standard can't be involved, woven in, entwined with the report of the student's performance against that standard. So what's in that? Class discussion, class participation, reading log minutes, group projects, homework. Those are all teacher techniques, and they're great. So please understand, yes, report homework. Have consequences if they don't do it. Really report that out, but separate that report from the academic report, because a grade can't be knowingly falsified. And if you weave homework into it, you knowingly falsify a grade. And that's an ethical breach. No teacher can do that. It turns out a lot of students in high school have slightly inflated grades, sometimes greatly inflated grades, and colleges who explored why they've had A's in their transcripts, but they're really B and C students, is because they did all this homework or service to the school, or they brought in canned food for the canned food drive, or they tutored younger classmates, something along those lines that really wasn't clear and consistent evidence over time of what they know against the standards. And homework is one of the great perpetrators of that dilution of grade accuracy, the lowering of integrity. We don't want to do that. So most teachers who struggle with this, well, they begin to say, all right, I'll count all those peripheral things, homework included, as 20% of the grade instead of 40%. They try to whittle it down to 10. All right, homework will count 10%. All the rest of my grade will be 90% from the summative assessments. And that seems very legitimate. But think about it. If your grade for an A is 95 to 100, and the kid does no homework, he's already down to a 90%. Yet he might demonstrate 100% proof he knows it all. The highest grade he can get is a B, which is a false report of what he knows against standards. And you can't do that, because a grade that's been falsified in some way, diluted, lessened in its accuracy, Well, then it can't be used to make decisions, to provide feedback, or to document students' progress, which are the three big reasons why we do grades in the first place. You undermine the entire enterprise of grading, and it makes it much more difficult for the teachers that the child has the following year. So, what would grading experts say? Homework should probably count 0. What is it in my class? Well, I'm out of the classroom right now because I'm helping teachers work through this. But when I'm in the classroom, it's 5% or less. I know it's a moderate hypocrisy, but what's in that 5%? All those formative teacher techniques and methods. So really homework counts about what? 1.2%? It's negligible, because in my school, an A was 94 to 100. Kid could not do any of that other stuff, and he could actually demonstrate 100% evidence for those standards. The report would be accurate. So count homework just as much until it crosses the point where it actually influences the accuracy of the grade. Then you can't count it that number anymore. One of the issues that always comes up is how teachers deal with failure. And that always leads to a conversation about redos, retakes, do-overs. And we have to meet that head on. There's this mindset that I have to be real rigid with this in order to teach kids to respect and honor deadlines and whatever else it might be to get them ready for that larger world. But that's actually not very constructive in a lot of places. So let's take a look first at failure, and then we'll see how that kind of moves into the discussion about retakes or do-overs. A lot of times teachers will think that they're doing the right thing by waving from the rim of the pit. We all become these rim wavers. The child has dug a pit for himself. He's really dug himself in. He was irresponsible, whatever it was. And we sit there and we go, so it's cold down there, and there's no way out. It's a little bit lonely. Well, that just stinks. Join us when you can. That'll learn you. And we wag the admonishing finger from afar, as if that will teach. It doesn't. There must be hope. Without hope, you have a much bigger problem than your grading system or differentiated instruction. You have a kid who wants to throw it on the ball and go home. I can't teach if my whole mindset is gotcha, instead of, hey, what do I need to do so you are successful? So one of the things we can do is we can jump in that pit, and we can say, even though it might not be true, we can act like it and qualify for an Academy Award. I've been here before. I know the way out. Come with me. That's actually much more constructive. It speaks to Carol Dweck's notion of growth mindset as opposed to fixed intelligence. I was never good at math. I won't be good at this math. I will never be good at math. I don't have a math gene in my body. Just let me take the test and let me take my F. That's fixed intelligence. Growth mindset is more, you know what, I don't know it now. But with enough effort and the resources, I can come to know it. And to the same level as anybody else who knows it well. That's that growth mindset that we want to cultivate in our classrooms. A lot of teachers hide behind that 50-50 notion. Like, the kid has to meet me halfway. No, after 25 years of teaching, it's much more 60-40. And the one kid who sits in the back of the room and never interacts, 90-10. We don't want it to be, you can get a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. We want it to be, you can get a horse to water, but you can't make it thirsty. It turns out you can. As the old joke goes, hand out salt licks to every single kid. I have to get them to the content and make it so compelling they want to drink from it. I don't leave it to their immaturity. For instance, a kid who says, I don't care if I get an F, school sucks. Pardon the vernacular there, but that happens a lot, either spoken or at least considered. That kid who says that I don't care about the F, school's just terrible, should not be left in charge of his learning and thereby his destiny. But a lot of teachers abdicate their responsibility. We're like editors working with writers. One of the great things we do if we're editing somebody else is save the writer from himself. So I'm going to jump in and get face to face with that immature morphing human, and I'm going to say, no, you're not allowed to give up on yourself. I'm now going to put everything in place so you actually partake in the content and you learn. I won't let his immaturity or lack of development dictate the level of his rise. So failure is not something to demonize. There's a wonderful saying, a wonderful book out there, Failure is Not an Option. NASA scientists use it. Lots of people use it. Business leaders use that phrase. But they do it and they explain what it really means, which is very, very powerful. But if we use that phrase just by itself, it actually becomes a negative. Failure is not only an option, it is preferred. Exposure to consistent success doesn't teach us as much as exposure to failure. In fact, in the top 3 all-time best teaching strategies, recovering from a blind alley, a stumble, actually teaches more than just walking normally through it and never falling. We want to make it actually okay to fail, but then to recover from it. And if that means we do this, it means that zeros are fine, Fs are fine, as long as they're recoverable in full. Now that begs the question, what about retakes and do-overs? Do I count them a lot? Do I not? What's up with that? Well, it turns out if you look at a lot of the instructional models and research out there, we have to do things over and over again. I know some studies suggest 24 times before we can get to even 80% proficiency. Well, that's important. I get that. That's fine. But how do people become really, really proficient? By doing things over and over again. But our classrooms don't allow for that because we have this curriculum overload. We have to get through this over and over. But try to imagine, I've got time to do 24 persuasive essays, 24 labs on ions to teach you about ions. We don't have time to do that. So we think we're teaching them deadlines and responsibility by actually doing something that is not sound instruction. That's not good. So from time to time, as time and resources allow, we need to open ourselves up to redoing things. So think about it. LSATs, MCATs, praxis exam for teachers in the United States, bar exam for lawyers, CPA exams for accountants, driver's license tests, auto mechanic certification exam, pilot's license tests are all allowed to be redone over and over and over again for full credit. High stakes, fully reflective of the larger responsible world kids will one day enter. They're allowed to be done for full credit over and over again. How pompous is it for a classroom teacher to say, my quiz, this paper, this test, this homework is so indicative of the larger world of responsibility that I'm trying to teach you, and so high stakes, it can't possibly be redone. You don't have a pedagogical leg to stand on. One time I came up behind one of my students who was trash talking me. He was very frustrated with me. And his classmate saw me coming up behind him. His eyes got really big because there's no time to warn his classmate friend that I was coming up, particularly since I was walking up behind him doing this. And I stood behind that student of mine and I listened to him say this, man, Mr. Wormley makes you do it over and over again until you learn it. It sucks. For me, touchdown. I'll grab it. In fact, I find it a bit of a cop-out. It's a weak teacher who doesn't allow redos and do-overs because you're not teaching to make sure he learns it. You're teaching to make sure he learns it on the conveyor belt. You're 11, you learn this. You're 12, you learn this. You're hiding behind the factory model of schooling. If you teach something to kids and they don't learn it, it's like a 0 or a D or an F, and you say there's no chance to recover, you said 3 things that are unacceptable to a highly accomplished professional. You said, first, hey, this assignment had absolutely no educational value. Yet I assigned it to you anyway, but it was totally skippable. That's not cool. You're assigning busy work, you bring shame on the whole profession when you do that. If it's worth assigning, it's worth getting done because it matters. It transforms a student from where he was prior to if he had not done it at all. Second, you said, hey, you didn't do all this work? Nah, just take the 0, you don't have to do it. How does that teach consequence and accountability? The consequence in my class for not doing your work is doing your work. I will haunt your nightmares. And the third one is the most heinous. You've just said, it's okay if you don't learn this. That's beyond most teachers' pay grade. Only a state, a province, a school board gets to decide what the curriculum is, not the classroom teacher. I need to make sure that I teach in whatever way possible you become successful, not just to say, here's the curriculum, and now let me document your deficiencies with it. That's not teaching, and we should live up to the promise of all that teaching can be. Well, that's a really interesting question, this idea of zeros on the 100-point scale. Notice it's not just zeros. It's zeros on the 100-point scale. Because zeros on the 4.0 scale, 3.0, check, check, minus, and zero, those are all fine. Because that zero has an equal influence on all the other numbers if you were to mathematically calculate the grade in some massive aggregate. And that's an issue right there we'll get to in just a moment. But this idea of zeros on the 100-point scale is one of the most controversial issues everywhere I go. And it's born out of this idea of using the 100-point scale as a way to measure and report human progress against a goal with great specificity. It was never meant to do that. It's a bit of a corruption to do that. So let's take a look at some of the reasoning behind not doing it step by step. First, consider, it doesn't matter where you set the line for what each letter grade is. Some school districts, an A is 95 to 100, sometimes it's 94, sometimes it's 93, sometimes it's 90, and sometimes it's 80 to 100. A B is 60 to 79, a C is 40 to 59, a D is 20 to 39, and an F is 19 to 0. Well, they're trying to show that's a 4.0 scale with 20 level increments for each one of the 4, 3, 2, 1, and 0. Trying to equate 4.0 to 100.0 should teachers need that translation. It's what the community will tolerate. There's not like a set of research data that says an A should be this or a B should be that. Okay, so now the teacher's deciding, I've got this massive F range. Often that's 59 to 0 or 60 to 0 or 65, something like that. Just for the sake of example, we'll say that that's 60 to 0. Okay, so a D would be, the lowest D would be a 51 in that case. Or excuse me, a 61. So now we're thinking, do I give the lowest, most hurtful, and unrecoverable end of the F range, or to give the most recoverable end of the F range with lots of hope, but nevertheless still an F? We begin to think, do I need degrees or gradations of F-titude? You're a tiny F, you're a large gigantor F. You don't need to do that. Once you're into that F zone, you're in the zone of not there yet, or no evidence of learning, good reason or bad reason, moral or immoral, it doesn't matter. You have not demonstrated evidence. So in some high schools, there might be no Carnegie unit, no credit given. But whatever it is, good reason or bad, no credit's given. Okay. Well, I have to also teach and grade in such a way as to engender hope. If a kid wants to throw in the ball and go home, I can't teach him because he's divested from my classroom. If a kid gets 1-0, it takes a mammoth pile of perfect 100s just to creep up to the D zone, which falsifies a grade, but also is so overwhelming to most students who are really humans in the morphing that why try? It's insurmountable to me, and I've got to keep my kids vested. So if I'm trying to decide between a 0 and a 59 or a 60, I'm going to decide on the most hopeful end, but nevertheless an accurate report. This kid has not shown evidence of his learning. An F is an F is an F. I don't need to decide whether it's a gigantic F or a small f because I'm going to respond the same way. Investigate and take corrective action. Now you might be thinking some of those students will brag. Man, I did nothing at all. I blew it off. You all worked so hard. But me, who did nothing, I still got a 60. Yeah. What's that kid really saying? I did nothing at all. You guys worked hard, but I did nothing, and I still failed. Ooh, that doesn't sound so good. The students are the first ones to realize how absurd this all is, and they don't think they're getting something for having done nothing. That's not even close to the truth. All we're doing is mitigating this extraordinary negative impact. Think about this. What if we gave the A the same influence as we give Fs today? 60 to 0? Well, the A is now 60 points. 100 down to 40 is the A range. Well, it'd be actually physically hard to get anything less than straight A's. You would never allow such an outlier of an A to have such a skewing upward influence. You should find it just as absurd to find an F having such a skewing lower influence. We wouldn't do that. If a kid got in the teens, he got a 15 out of 100 and an 18 out of 100, and in one glorious moment of clarity, he got a 98. Mathematically, they would skew him up into the passing range, but you would never tolerate that. That's an idea that Doug Reeves talks about in his writings, and it's worth thinking about. Well, consider this. The grading scale in a lot of places is 190, 80, 70, 60. That's a 4.0 scale, 4, 3, 2, 1. A 2.0, well, basic ratios and proportions that third graders understand, that would be an 80. A 70 would be a 1. 60 on a 100-point scale would be about a 0 on a 4.0 scale. Well, people misapply work ethics. They think, all right, it's a 100-point scale we just did. I'm not going to give you a 60. I'm going to give you nothingness, which is a 0. How many levels is a 0 below failure? Well, it's 50, 40, 30, 20, 10, 0. That's 6 levels below failure. It's not failure, it's 6 levels below. That's the exact same thing as saying on a 4.0 scale, child doesn't do anything, there's no evidence of learning. Instead of giving him a 0, which would be legitimate, because he has no evidence, he has no credit for doing or learning anything, well, I'm going to give him a -6. In other words, he has to climb 6 levels up just to get even with absolute failure. This is insanity. But wait, it gets worse. Think about this, and I actually heard this from a school board member in Norfolk, Virginia. Think about this. We do the temperature readings for 5 days in June. Now, Norfolk, Virginia, it's very hot and humid, and we use Fahrenheit. So those of you who do Celsius, you'd have to make the translations. But basically, if we did like 87 one day, 88 another, 84 another, 85 another, oh, Friday, my bad, I totally forgot to take the temperature. So it's a 0. Well, mathematically calculate that all up, and it's 68.8 degrees. Is 68.8 degrees accurate for the weather in Norfolk, Virginia in a hot week in June? Not even close. And grades have to be accurate. You can't mess this up by having a distorted scale that was never used to report, or meant to be used, to report human progress. You're going to have to change the scale so that the 0, the 1, the 2, the 3, and the 4, they have equal influence on all the others. But you know what? This is not a big problem, is it? If we disaggregate. What if I had a kid who did nothing or did less than nothing? He got a 47. He got a 0, whatever it was. So I appointed it as a 60. So he gets 60, 60, 60. And in one, again, glorious moment of clarity, he gets 100. Yeah! And then 60, 60. If you average that all together, he could actually pass. Nothingness, nothingness, no evidence, no evidence, no evidence, lots of evidence, no evidence, no evidence. He could technically pass, but that's only if you average. One of the things we've learned in differentiated classrooms and in standards-based grading is we no longer use mean or averaging. We use central tendency, the most consistent level of performance over time. And it turns out that has a much higher correlation with any kind of testing that will be done on that student outside of your classroom. So if you really want to have integrity in your grades, they mean something, and you don't want to falsify the report of what a kid knows, you'll want to disaggregate. In this standard, there's no evidence. In this standard, there's evidence. That's criterion referenced. And it no longer becomes an issue, 0s on the 100-point scale, if you stop doing the averaging and actually increase the accuracy, the truth, and the usefulness of your letter grades.
The book Formative Assessment and Standards-Based Grading is the second in a series of books we're putting out collectively called Classroom and Strategies That Works Library. Really, this particular book, Formative Assessment and Standards-Based Grading, is the culmination of about, well, at least 10 years worth of work on my part on formative assessment. It's actually got books that were written previously, and each book was kind of a little piece, and then we were able to add to that, and finally come up with a comprehensive approach to formative assessment, and then how that translates into standards. It, in part, echoes what a lot of people are saying now with formative assessment, in part, but we take a perspective on formative assessment that actually can transform the classroom. With our approach to formative assessment, we try to broaden the scope of what an assessment is, and instead of just thinking of an assessment as a test, we actually talk about 3 different types of assessment or forms of assessment. One being what they call obtrusive assessments, and a test is a form of obtrusive assessments, but there's also demonstrations, there's projects, there's even discussions with students that are all obtrusive assessments. Another type is unobtrusive assessments, and that's when students aren't even aware they're being assessed. And then the most important one, from my perspective, is what we call student-generated assessments. And that's where students say, okay, I'm ready to show you I'm now at this level. Now, that's where our particular approach challenges some previously held conceptions. One is the 100-point scale doesn't work well within the system I'm describing. So we're real big on rubrics, or we call them scales. Just how to design those, how to use those to score all those different types of assessments. And then finally, given that you have this data in a classroom, how can you put that together into a traditional grade if you want? Or how can you be very non-traditional too, and actually be standards-based, which means that students actually move at their own pace. So it's a topic that's out there a lot, and it looks like, and just from the title, it might look like, well, this is just another repeat of what a lot of people are saying on formative assessment. We've got a very different, a very clear perspective on it, which actually leads, as I said, to a transformed classroom.
But I don't want to just present a problem without having some solutions. On the left-hand side, you have what I think are toxic practices that we must challenge. When students get zeros for missing work, it is the academic death penalty. And I am more than willing, as a holder of an American passport, to stipulate that Canadian students are just plain better behaved than students from the lower 48. But can I just ask you, even among your best behaved students, have you ever seen one pick up a zero and say, "A zero, I have now seen the light. I shall go forth and sin no more." A zero, I now. Why didn't it occur to me before? I realized the value of time management. Or, with that zero, is their motivation blown? Friends, your worst behavior and discipline problems in November and December are students who had accumulated so many zeros that their semester was over, and they were the ones in your office creating problems. If we want to make this better, we have to have a better solution for missing work that I will introduce in a moment. We have to get rid of the average. I've read the mathematics curriculum of this province. Keep me honest, who teaches fifth grade in this room? Fifth grade. Man, your students learn the mean, the median, and the mode, correct? Because fifth graders in Ontario know that politicians can lie to you with an average. They can misuse statistics. Fifth graders know that the average is not always the best representation of a data set. And yet we let people with advanced degrees use the average all the time as a sole representation of student achievement. Stop using the average. Thirdly, the semester killer, the giant project, the main lab, the big term paper, that 4 weeks, 5 weeks of intensive work destroy an entire semester. Now, I've got some better alternatives here. I've quoted a good deal of research this morning. One educational researcher you may not be familiar with is an unfortunate import from the U.S. called Larry the Cable Guy. Now, I know no one here has watched Larry the Cable Guy on purpose, but you might have accidentally been in front of a television that was accidentally turned to that channel when you saw Larry the Cable Guy give a very thoughtful response to a student who has missing work. He would say, "Get her done. Get her done," which may not sound very elegant, but you want to know what Larry the Cable Guy does? This is, in real schools, what happens. In Lake Taylor High School, a high-poverty urban system, you miss one assignment, you have same-day after-school suspension, not to say, "I will do my homework," but to do the homework. In Hale High School, they give you until Thursday of every week. You get the work done. In more and more elementary and middle schools, there are times before and, yes, during and after school, kids get the work done. The appropriate penalty, don't think for one moment I'm easy. I'm not easy on kids. They should get work done. But the appropriate penalty for missing work is getting the work done. And that's what we can do, and that will have a much better impact on students. Secondly, rather than the average, we use the best representation of people's work. I asked our colleague who coached basketball earlier today about her coaching techniques from the sideline. Has anyone in this room coached track, perhaps? Ma'am, you've coached track. When you coach track, do you decide who to send to the championships at the end of the semester based upon their average time? You do not. She decides who's running best at the end of the season. Let me use an example that hits closer to home. Let your worst nightmare come true, and you're all now graduate students in Professor Reeves' Research and Statistics class. And you want to know what September looks like? I hate him and the horse he rode in on. Look, it's been 30 years since I had a math class. I'm teaching social studies. I'm teaching third grade. I'm an administrator. Why should I have to do statistics and research? And October's not much better, and round about the end of November, Somebody, you mean he's not trying to make me into a propeller head like he is? He's just trying to help me apply research. Now I get it. And you're in my office in December explaining why I should not use the average between now I get it and I hate him. Why I should not use the average for your final grade, and you're right. But if you believe that that's right for you, then for goodness sake, don't do it to students as well. The average doesn't make sense. It assumes linearity, and I've never worked with a linear student in my life. And finally, resilience. You know what? Kids are going to miss assignments. They're going to blow a test. They're going to mess up a project. What lesson do we want to teach them when they meet failure? The lesson I want my children to learn and your children to learn is one of resilience. So the consequence is not merely a low grade. The essence of assessment for learning is that there are serious consequences for messing up. The most serious consequence is not a 0, it's not an F, it's called getting it done. Now I want to tell you, I have actually done this with some students in Western Canada, and I've done this with students elsewhere, and I had focus groups with them, and let me warn you in advance, they hate this. Don't think you'll be being easy on them, they hate it. They, in their parlance, you know what they say, this precisely. And they just hate it. Why? I heard these words, give me the 0, the operative word being give. Because they're used to simply getting by, and maybe a little smiley face will get them a D or something. No. You want to do something really scary, get the work done. And I'm quoting this one young man now because his words were so persuasive to me. It is such a hassle in this school, man. You try to turn this stuff in, she gives it back to you. You miss it, she makes you do it again. You can't even get a D. It's such a hassle in this school, man, to get a C. You might as well get a B. Whereupon we have the wonderful spectacle of whining adolescents bellyaching all the way to the honor roll. That is it, my friends. And let me just remind you, they're not going to thank us. When do students thank us? Years later? This path we are on of assessment for learning is difficult, challenging, unpopular work, but it's the right thing to do.